The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 68.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Thank you for joining us today on the EL. We have one of my favorite not only authors, but speakers that I love to go to conferences and listen to, and that is Chris Brogan, and he's going to be talking about The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth, entrepreneurship for weirdos, misfits, and world dominators. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Well, sure. My name's Chris Brogan. I run a company called Owner Media Group. We are doing a professional development, I guess is the best way to explain it, kind of a company these days, where I help people try to figure out how to own the game that they most want to win, which is normally their own. I've, through the past, done a lot of other stuff. I've run marketing consulting companies. I've worked with a lot of the biggest brands that you've ever heard of, like Google and Microsoft, Coke and General Motors, those kinds of people, all the way down to standalone solo folks. So in the most recent iteration of what I've been doing, I've been helping anyone from any sized business just try to figure out some really solid principles of ownership that I think will help from your life all the way up through your business and where you want to head in the future.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into your book, The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth, which was made available for purchase on April 21st, 2014. And Chris, we're going to move quickly, but we're really going to cover the top questions that our listener/reader wants to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth?
Quite honestly, I needed to write this book for my kids. My daughter and son are both really swell and lovely, smart, creative kids, but they're never going to have a real live day job. It's just never going to match what they believe and what they do. So it was kind of as a defense mechanism, because they're going to need to better understand all the cool things that make them the weirdos they are. Or how do you get a job out of that? How do you get paid? How do you find business? And so as I started to work on that process, I realized that there were a lot of people who the current books on entrepreneurship basically show two white guys shaking hands across the boardroom table with ties on. And I was saying, gee, that's not everybody, I don't think. And so, kid I went to 8th grade with, Doug Quinn, runs the Big Gay Ice Cream Company. And it started as a Big Gay Ice Cream truck in New York City. And everyone was like, you're crazy. And he made his own flavors of ice cream. Most ice cream trucks usually just vend other people's products. He had all kinds of crazy products. He got so big that they made a store in New York, and then another store in New York, now in LA, and now everywhere. And now they have a huge coffee table book coming out. So that's a freak business, I would say. In fact, to the point that some company in New York decided that they might rename themselves into the Big Straight Ice Cream Company, which I thought was kind of weird, positioning, but okay.
That is weird. I think you've already alluded to the answer to the second question, but I'll ask it anyway. And that's, what makes your book different from others regarding the same topic? And the reason why we ask this question is because there's anywhere from 100 to 150 different entrepreneurial books that come out every single month, according to Amazon anyway. So we want to give you an opportunity to really differentiate, and who better to do that than someone whose book is on, kind of differentiation.
Oh, sure. So in my mind, a good lot of entrepreneurial books fall into one or two categories. One studies people that you're never going to be, like Steve Jobs, and, just give that one up. You're not going to be Steve Jobs. The other kind of book is what I call day job porn. So it's the kind of book you read that's like, oh, I could quit my job someday, and it'll be exciting and magical, and fairies will fly around. And there's lots of those. I mean, there's lots of books like you can live your dreams and kiss your babies and sparkly unicorn. And my book is not that. My book is a whole lot of systems and processes and the foundational work that you need to turn your entrepreneurship into something that keeps you out of your mom's basement. And so what really separates me from a lot of the rest is that this is entrepreneurship from the ground up. And, it's not boring. It is not like a big giant book full of broccoli, but there is definitely a lot of stuff in here that is meant for full-on action and not just read it and go back to your bed.
With that being said, Chris, how would you want the reader to engage with your book? Is this the kind of book that they should start from front and read all the way through, or is this one they can really go in and cherry pick information as needed?
Um, there's some chapters that are better than other chapters. I mean, kind of like record albums, there's usually the one or two tracks that we love, and then there's all the other songs that we adore. So I think, for instance, chapter 3, Choose Your Own Adventure, Defining Success, is a really important chapter because so many people have no idea how to measure their own success. And it's like, getting in the car, turning on the GPS, but not putting a destination and going, this GPS sucks. It won't tell me where I'm going. And unfortunately, it's true. It is totally telling you where you're going. It just doesn't tell you where you want to go. So, I think there's chapters like that. There's some other chapters where I think, you're going to want to touch base with them after something's gone on. For instance, there's a lot about failure in this book. So I think that some different points you're going to come back and want to pluck through the failure sections because you're going to say, well, Chris said failure is awesome, but I don't feel that way today. Now what should I do? And I think there's that. The other thing I really want people to do with the book is it's an action book. It is meant to do things. And I think that it blows my mind how many times I see this. And I see it on Twitter because I track, my book titles. And someone will say, finish Freak Shall Inherit the Earth, now reading Happiness of Pursuit. And it's like, what are you, playing bingo? Like, you have to do something with the book for it to be worth it. So I would hope that people would stop and actually do some of the work.
Absolutely. So, Chris, now that we have the purpose behind the book and a little bit of the background information, this is my favorite part where I really just hand over the mic and allow you to take a deep dive into the content. And really, this is the entrepreneur that's on their way home. They might be on the treadmill. And they're wondering, is this book my next great read that's going to help me personally or professionally? And so will you take us through your book?
Holy cannoli. By the way, this is the only podcast that's ever asked that question. Most of them, I can already tell if they've never even read the book because usually they'll talk about the first few pages of the book. I'm like, oh, the part you can read on Amazon Preview. So the very first thing is I point out that this stuff isn't really new. One of the number one criticisms I get all the time with all of the things I've ever written is, this is all basic stuff that, we've heard for centuries. And I always say, yeah, no kidding. Guess what? If common sense were actually practiced, no one would have to sell it. I get to make money every day because you're too dumb to follow basic common sense. So, that's my negative opinion warning of why you have to do this. The first chapter basically just talks you through what, are you really a freak? And that's me taking you off the ledge. People, when they hear the phrase freak, are thinking sort of face piercings and tattoos and stuff like that. And really, a lot of the self-identified freaks I've talked to are guys like Mitch Jackson, who's California's leading trial attorney, and Rod and Mel, who run a podcast for accountants. So they're CPAs. And a dentist wrote me and told me that he goes, I'm such a freak. I'm so not like your typical person. And so you are definitely the people who are freaks are people who have like a tattoo level obsession with the kind of business that they want to run and the kinds of people that they want to serve. Right after that, I get into a chapter talking about, what's the difference between weirdos who live in mom's basement and people who actually have a business. And one of the big missing ingredients, for instance, is discipline. So I walk you, a lot of books will say you just need more discipline. And I instead walk you through an actionable system for how to build discipline. I walk through all of the excuses that you might make for why not to do what you're going to do. And then, like I said, the next chapter is all about success. So that one's important to me because it contains a list of things to quit. It talks about, how success doesn't just show up. And it talks all about, ways that you should think about your success and how to measure it. From there, we go right into skills. What I like about this is just that, a lot of times we do the things that we know how to do and we skip all the things we don't know how to do. So I kind of push you on that. Like, if you're not really great at sales, you have to be really great at sales. Sales is part of business. I talk about networking because it's amazing how people really have horrendously bad ways of trying to connect with others. And I give people some, decent ways to think about it. I give a few basic business model ideas because I think we always have to think about the game that we're trying to build around ourselves. From there, we talk about falling in love with not knowing because to me, just being a perpetual learner, which obviously the people on this show are, that's your game, treadmill person. And so I would say that I'm trying really hard to show you, how important it is to be wrong, how curiosity is really important. I think that there's another weird thing that people get into when they're trying to start a business is thinking they need to know all kinds of really deep level detail stuff. Like people are telling me, oh, I've got to take a course on advanced WordPress. And I'm like, no, you don't. You just need to build a website. Pretty easy. 2 clicks and a couple of bucks and you're done. So I think that there's just lots of bits in there in the Falling in Love with Not Knowing that are worth plucking through. Structuring a framework for your days. I talk about this a lot with entrepreneurial types. They quit their day job, which had all kinds of systems and structures for a reason. And they're like, I'm free of my systems and structures and I'm suddenly not making any money. And I help people, figure that out. The next chapter is all about how to be an employeepreneur. Some people don't want to quit their day job. And for some people, it's not the right move. My friend Ben Fanning's got a whole book coming out shortly about not quitting and about, you can really create the job that you really want inside your organization if you want. And so that's important. Another whole chapter about systems, because why wouldn't we? Including interviewing the guy who is sort of mechanical guy of my business, Ron Hood. And then a whole part about what solo and small business owners need to know. And then I'm getting all of it. This is a pretty short book, by the way. It's less than 200 pages. Like you could read this in like 3 really long poops. If you had 3 good long bathroom trips, you could be done. Another whole chapter on falling in love with not knowing. It was so important that I wrote it twice. I try to line people up with understanding how to worship obstacles and challenges. The real defining difference between people who make it as an entrepreneur and people who don't are how you approach obstacles and how you approach setbacks. And if you're the kind of person who goes, we'll never make it, because something comes in front of you, then you're doomed. And, it's that horrible, horrible quote from I think Henry Ford, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. Well, it's, I write that pretty large in that chapter. Next is a chapter that, will make me continue to seem like a social media guy, even though I don't feel like one, called Build Your Own Media Empire, which is like this show. I mean, no one gave you permission to make this show, near as I can tell. And, you decided to do it because you thought other people like you who are passionate book freaks wanted to connect. And so that's a whole chapter about that. Chapter 13 is about making sure you find all your fellow freaks. Chapter 14 is about taking ownership, and that's kind of a pivotal chapter, even though it's kind of small, because it's about the difference between just being a freak and then maybe going to be an owner. Chapter 15 is probably one of the smallest chapters, but it's all about when things go wrong and how to deal with failure somewhere. I had figured I'd already talked so much about failure at that point that I didn't have to write a huge chapter. And then the very last chapter is just a summary of the whole book called Take Action, Fight Crime, Save the World. And it kind of gives some suggestions on where to get going. And I think it's worth ending a book on a whole chapter on making sure people take action, because by that time we're sort of beat up and we, have sort of slogged through and feel like we're at the end of the race, but we're actually at the beginning of the next race. And that's the book.
Chris, what I love about your book, listening to you talk, I think I've been to at least 3 conferences where you've been at, is that you have, no matter what you do, you have a ton of transparency, whether it's on social media, whether it's through your book that you're writing, whether you're on stage. And I think that I think people crave that. Not. I mean, you don't just put like you said in the very beginning. I guess when you're differentiating your book, you don't just put the great stuff, like you're talking about the unicorns, kissing your babies, that different kind of stuff. You put you give someone a real, authentic, transparent idea of what to expect, and I appreciate that big time as an entrepreneur myself. So, thank you for that, and thank you for the awesome. That was a phenomenal bird's eye view, and now we're going to be almost mean. I think this next question's mean, but we're going to ask you for the satellite view and ask you that if the reader can only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of your entire book, everything that you just laid out for us, what would you want that to be?
Oh, crap. You were right. This is a mean question. You know what? I'll give you just one. Allow for no excuses. Just set yourself for no excuses. And I think that the reason is that there's just so many things that people tell me. And people will say to me, oh, but I'm blind. So is Stevie Wonder. They'll say, oh, but my parents hated each other. Everyone's parents hated each other. You know what I mean? There's so few loving relationship stories. Broken homes are a huge number these days. It's not even the 50% that we grew up thinking it was. People say to me, I'm physically disabled. My friend Glenda just gave a keynote at Inbound. Glenda has the use of basically one thumb. She can't speak well enough for you to understand her unless you take the real time to do it. And she gave a speech on a stage with tons of people with speech software because she kicks butt. She wrote a book. A lot of times people tell me, oh, I'm trying to write a book. I can never seem to find the time. Glenda wrote one with one thumb, one character at a time. And so your excuse is invalid. So I find that the number one thing that people really need to do is to give their excuses a vacation and not ever give them their desk back, because that's what's holding you back.
Perfect. I pulled a couple of different quotes out of everything that you've said so far in this interview, but that is actually our next question. And that's, do you have a favorite quote from your book? And this was really designed, again, to be a different question, not a favorite quote from someone else. But I know authors sometimes have a lot of humility, but what's something that you wrote that you really think was great? Or let's say that's maybe resonating with the readers?
Crap, I don't know. You know what? I wish I had my Kindle open because it would tell me like the number one thing that people highlighted, and I'm not that smart. But I would say it's humility, but it's sort of a blend of humility and Alzheimer's, because I wrote this book a while ago. But I would say that the thing, if there was a quote that mattered to me, it's not going to come fast enough for me to do this in a podcast. Wait, but no, I will say that here it is, 114, and it's a subheader. You have to know only enough to start. That's it. You know why? Because that takes away a bunch of excuses too. You have to know only enough to start, because I wonder how many people who listen to your show, who kind of like gorge on books the way you and I do, use those books as once I learn enough, then I can start. Well, congratulations. Today's that day. Now you can start. Don't quit your job. That's the other weird thing people always seem to do when they think they're going to be entrepreneurs, is they quit their job and then sit around going, well, now what do I do? You need money, it turns out. I tried using my Clout score to pay my mortgage and it doesn't work. So you've got to do something. So work and don't cheat your job. A lot of times people say, oh, so you just kind of show up and pretend you're working. No, work. But until you can afford to, cover your own salary, then cover it through your job and then figure out what you're going to do to make the universe better as you go.
So I have no doubt that this book is going to create paradigm shifts for individuals that read it. And that's basically leads into our last question, which is, what's a book that you've read that's had a massive impact on you, created a paradigm shift? And this doesn't necessarily have to be on entrepreneurship. This can be on anything.
Ender's Game. I've quoted Ender's Game in 4 different books that I've written. And it's by Orson Scott Card, and it's a science fiction one. And watching the movie doesn't count. It is the opposite of counting. You cannot count the movie, the book. And in there is everything. I mean, in there is a book that I read when I was about 15 that I went, whoa, I could see things differently. And with that change of observational viewpoint, everything is different. And I can have a different solution. That book is, hugely responsible for how I see the world differently than most people, and thus how I make money differently than most people.
Excellent. Well, Chris, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also your book, The Freak Shall Inherit the Earth? And this is not the point of this is for plugs. I know sometimes people are like, well, I don't mean to throw out a plug. This is for a plug. So if you have anything coming up that our audience could definitely prosper from, let us know, please.
Buy my damn book. No. If you go to callingallfreaks.com, that redirects you to the page at chrisbrogan.com where the book is. And so that's probably the easiest way to go. Also, though, once you're at chrisbrogan.com, get my newsletter. And the reason I say that is that my newsletter is the best thing I do every week. And it is all original and new content. And it's all really directly applicable to all the stuff I'm talking about in this interview. But more so, once you get my newsletter, you can just hit reply and talk directly to me. I don't have some weird staff of people who answer my mail or anything like that. I figure if Branson can answer his own mail, I can do mine. So drop me a line and, carry on the conversation from this interview with Wade. I'm always there for you.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your creation. We know a lot of blood, sweat, and tears go into these. That's why sometimes we refer to them as someone's baby. But thank you for sharing your book with us today.
It's my utter pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks again for listening in today, and I hope you liked today's interview. If you'd like to get your hands on The Freak Shall Inherit the Earth or any of the other resources mentioned by Chris, just look at the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.